Hey guys, Jhaman the Shaman here from the Cataclysm podcast, cataclysm.com, and just want to give you a new thing we're doing here. Cho'gal attempts, or we downed him, but we're gonna do a group commentary. I pulled some guys from my guild in, and we're actually gonna talk from each role exactly what's going on. So Cho'gal, we did this on 10 man. This is our 10-man attempt. We have downed him on 25, but I don't believe this is obviously not that one. And so some of the abilities to worry about for Cho'gal, he's got a couple phases. He's going to cast Conversion, which is it mind controls people and it makes them cast Worship. This can be interrupted, they can be feared. Anything that can stop a cast can be used to stop conversion. And for every time they worship, for every couple seconds, they'll give Cho'gal a buff. He'll do more damage to the tank and more damage overall. Other things to worry about are he'll spawn ads periodically throughout the fight. The ads have to die soon, and when they die, they leave a void zone on the ground. And the void zone will spawn ads after Cho'gal. It sounds really confusing, but it's not too bad. He'll cast Fester Blood, and that'll spawn ads. And if an ad's alive, a big ad is alive, Fester Blood you'll wipe the raid pretty much. Anyway, it doesn't matter that much, but just to introduce some of the guys here, our priest, holy priest, is Aerz. You want to say something, Aerz?
Yeah, actually Discipline Priest, but that's okay.
Or Disc,
how's it going,
sorry.
guys?
I always forget. And then we got Stave, who's our feral druid, tank, and DPS, depending.
Yep, hello everyone.
And then Mesa is a resto shaman.
Unfortunately.
And then Sythis, our hunter.
Ew.
All right, so basically, guys, Cho'gal, what to know about this fight? From a ranged DPS standpoint, I know that killing the ads that spawn after Fester Blood, which is you kill the big ad, and then you kill the small ads after he casts Fester Blood, and they spawn from the corpse of the big ad when it dies. And so the more big ads that are dead, the more small ads that spawn. And that's basically your job as a ranged DPS, is kill the ads. And Cho'gal, obviously. Sythis controls the ads, the small ads that spawn, and he said he had a couple tips for hunters, etc., or just things to think about when you're in that role. What do you got, Sythis?
Yeah, a nifty little trick that you can use is survival hunters can spec into entrapment, which your snake and frost traps will lock the target down for 4 seconds. The festered blood ads are susceptible to the snare, so if you position a frost and snake trap adjacent next to the corpses, they will get locked down for roughly 4 to 8 seconds. Good little tip there.
Thanks. And I know I dropped Earth Binds, Thunderstorm, Druid knockbacks. Those are all great on the ads, especially when they start getting up to the higher numbers before the final phase. Healing this fight, I obviously haven't healed it, but Mesa, Aerz, anything to note while healing?
One thing, the fight's pretty simple from a healing standpoint because he's alternating between his Flames orders and Shadows orders, so you can predict the damage pretty well. You know when the tank damage is going to come in Fire's orders, and then obviously the 3 Shadow ticks of the Shadow order. The biggest thing to remember is just the Shadow order is just going to tick 3 times, so don't panic, don't blow your cooldowns. You're going to have time to heal the raid up. And the biggest thing is you just need to heal your tanks first and foremost on those Shadows orders, just because you will lose tanks if you're prioritizing the raid. So you want to make sure your tanks are healing, and just be careful on those.
And also, everyone, we're stacking, and you might notice that we're stacking in melee in this fight, and that's because every time he does his worship ability or his conversion, it turns us into obviously the MC, and we fear to break the MC, or we'll get an AoE stun. A War Stomp works. Our warrior might shockwave through the boss, and wind shear works. So when we start spreading out on these ads, and we're not so clumped up, wind shearing is definitely the way to go. I don't know, a Stave as a melee DPS or a tank, what would you recommend people think about most while they're doing this fight?
Things to think about as a tank. You want to make sure that you're in range of your healers pretty much at all times. No matter what role you're doing, whether you're off tanking or main tanking at the time. There's a tank switch in here, so you want to keep a good eye out for that. Be very communicative. You want to work with your healers. Make sure they know who's going to be taking the majority of the damage at the moment. In general, one of your tanks will be the one who switches in to move the adds back, and you can see that the adds are positioned. We actually try and position them so that they're all in about the same step, and we try and draw a line. We started at the right side and worked our way across that step towards the left. That can help a lot with ad control, and so that the adds are coming in evenly, so that your ranged DPS all have a pretty good spread on those. For the tank positioning, you probably want to tank them a little closer to the center than we have here if you're going to use the stairs method for the off pieces, the off tanked. You'll want to bring them a little closer. That way your range can stand about halfway between them, and your healers will still be able to heal both without any kind of range issue. Just looking at it as a melee, you're going to want to switch to the ad immediately when the ad spawns. And part of the reason for that is the ad has a spell called Depravity. It's a point-blank AoE ability that's going to give corruption out to all the melee and the tank. That needs to be interrupted immediately. Of course, range interrupts are great, but don't rely on them. You can get over there as melee and start getting those interrupts pretty much right away. You can see the void zones that are down on the ground. Melee, it will not favor hitting you, but if you're following the boss and he's running pretty quickly, it may target you still just because you're directly out of melee range, so you definitely still want to be aware of that. And while you're running to and away from the ad, keep in mind that you might end up getting hit by them. So really, really need to be aware. You can easily enter Phase 3 with 0 corruption, done correctly.
Yeah, I don't even think we've mentioned it yet, but if you notice on the bar at the bottom of my screen, it's a little bit it looks crazy looking. It's obviously not part of the normal UI. That is the corruption bar, and if you get hit by any ability throughout the fight by Cho'gal, it'll tick up, and so you want to avoid obviously the depravities that the adds cast, because that's an AoE, and it'll hit all the melee and the tanks, and it'll put them up a little. And you want to, and pretty much everything can be avoided up until the final phase. And in the final phase, it'll start ticking up slowly, and that's kind of the soft and rage. It's really easy to stay low on your corruption, even though I don't think I did a great job here. But it is pretty simple to not be corrupted fully or whatever. Also, because I have range interrupts, I'm really like interrupting it's like I got to do it. But definitely having a melee help out on that ad is such a big help, especially in 25-man when there's people scattered around the area that are getting feared or mind controlled. Getting a wind shear off on them is a lot better. It's a better use of my wind shear, but it's also a lot worse if that ad gets his cast off, and it usually shouldn't, because a melee should be on top of him with an interrupt. And these ads start getting out of control, these little ones, as the fight goes on. And so we had, I believe, 4, correct me if I'm wrong, guys, it was 4 ads, big ads die before we push Cho'gal into his final phase.
Yes, we had the 5th ad had spawned, but if you manage to push Cho'gal to Phase 2 before he casts Fester Blood, he will absorb the 5th ad, which is the goal.
Hey guys, I want to throw something in here. I just
Go
saw
ahead,
a
Mesa.
3rd mana tide. My job is done.
Yeah, Mesa is our Manatide bot. He's kind of like a Shadow Priest in BC, is how we talk about Resto Shamans. No, he definitely pulls his weight for healing, but that Manatide is a big deal too. So, but the final phase is probably the craziest phase for Cho'gal. He'll start spawning these things called they're creations or darkened creations, something like that, and they cast a channeled ability on people that makes them take 75% less healing and do 75% less damage. So obviously that's a bad thing. and your corruption's also ticking up, and periodically you're taking more and more damage. So obviously you want to not be taking that. What we did is we had Stave as the assist target. For anyone who didn't have interrupts is a good idea. It's kind of the refined thing. And Stave would run around and attack a worm, and everyone that didn't have interrupts would focus him. And anyone that could interrupt or stop those casts from the other ones, those would be taken out by like a wind shear or what is the shadow? Not shadow crash, but the shadow nova thing that Destrolocks have, and other stuff. Like anything you can stop them from casting is great, and then you want to kill them every time they come up. Even at like 5%, if the ads spawn, you, almost every time, unless you're really tight on the hardened rage, then you want to kill the ads. And you, also to note about corruption, as it ticks up, it gets worse and worse. Each 20 at 25, 50, and 75 and 100, it does something different. And I'm not positive on it, but it's bad. And 100 is sort of good, but it's not the best. You're gonna 25%, die pretty soon.
You'll be looking at a debuff that increases how quickly your corruption stacks up. So that can be dispelled and should be dispelled absolutely immediately. It's also just a good warning for everyone involved that your corruption is starting to get up a little bit. At 50, you will start randomly throwing up. If you throw up on anyone, you will add to their corruption. For the ranged healers, etc., even for the tanks, it's relatively easy to keep that away from people. As melee, generally what I've found the easiest thing to do is, if I stand in the middle, pretty much between his feet or at the edge of his feet, and I just kind of face my tune a little bit towards a corner, away from everyone, I can pretty easily prevent throwing that stack up on any. 75%, you'll grow an extra hand out of your back, and that hand will start lobbing shadow bolts at random party members, so it'll boost the amount of raid damage going in. At 100%, you will no longer be able to be healed, so any AoE, any damage you take is pretty much going to be there until the end of the fight or until you die. The advantage is you do 100% more damage, but you're gonna die. So, also as a note, the higher your corruption stack is, the more AoE damage you take in phase 3. So that's why the damage will steadily tick up in phase 3.
And because of that actual mechanic there that Stave mentioned, healers, you're going to want to save your raid cooldowns to the final 10%. You're going to want to have a power word barrier, a divine hymn, rotation, tranquilities, all those sorts of healing and raid cooldowns. You're going to start rolling those on the last 10%, similar as you would have on the Ascendant Council in the fight before. It's a pretty tight burn, that last 10%, so you want to make sure you have all those cooldowns up and ready to go.
Lock rocks and things of that nature also help.
Yeah, as you can see, I'm terrible at explaining things, and this is why we have raid leaders, and these guys are way better at it. That's why I brought them in, and they're it's great to have them. And I think that about covers. I don't know if there's anything else you guys want to throw in about Cho'gal that's super important, or that you just wanted really to tell everyone in the world about.
He's got a lot of eyes.
I was going to mention a little bit about the comp. We ran a little ranged heavy comp. That tends to be what we do. But this fight is not one that necessarily favors having ranged is helpful, but it is possible for melee to help out on the bloods. If you have a lot of range, you don't have to worry about it as much. But what you can do is make sure that you have a boomkin or someone else who puts out a decent amount of AoE, like a good warlock or something, AoE threat on those bloods. And then after a few seconds, your melee can run in, and they can use their light AoE abilities and help knock those down. Rogues help out a ton, tricks of the trade, one of your range, and just get in there and start whipping out some damage. This fight is actually not one of the worst ones for melee, so even if you have a melee heavy comp, this should be pretty doable as long as you have one decent ranged person to hold aggro on things. If you do happen to pull aggro on them, run away, kite them, do whatever you can. You do not want to melee these things if they're attacking you. It will end poorly for you. Your corruption is going to go through the roof.
Yeah, I think it's of all the fights we did, it's probably one of the simpler ones, but not mechanics wise, but in tuning wise. But I think it was fun. It was enjoyable. Hoping to see it on Heroic soon.
What are you eating, Jhaman? Just curious.
I'm sorry. I thought I had enough time to sneak a Cheeto. But hey, that's all good.
Sweet.
Thanks. Thanks for pointing that out. It's even worse now that the people heard it. All right.
Right.
And that's it. That's all. That's Cho'gal. Oh, look at that. All right.